Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Sometimes Ariana wondered if her mom gave birth to her for nothing. It never occurred to her mom. On the contrary, she boasted that everyone told her to get rid of the child. No profession, no job, no roof over her head. But she does not let out of her mouth a cigarette. Almost every day gets drunk in one company or another, where she drinks and stays the night. Does she even know who the father of her unborn child is? She's not a wench. She calls herself a biker. And people about such a loose-knit that bullet rides on their motorcycles on the roads and even says, shuddering, meat. At that speed, if anything happens, you can't pick up any bones. And I spit on everyone and gave birth to you, said Lucy's mom proudly. And it must be said that, having a baby, Lucy settled down. No, in other people's eyes, she remained the same uninhabited, but if you compare with her former, change was striking. Lucy and her daughter lived in a caravan trailer. She had a friend who owned a campground. There were different housing for those who are richer, tepees wooden houses, simplified version, and the cheapest, where you could settle trailers. The first thing Ariana remembered in her life was such an old trailer. She was crawling around in a disassembled bed. All around, windows left and right, in the back, and even overhead. And in front, there are lockers on both sides. If you open their doors, it's like the house is divided into two rooms. On one half is Ariana, on the other half is Lucy's folding table and two chairs. Alone or with one of the guests. They drink beer and listen to music. Sometimes Lucy falls asleep there in the padded chair with her head on the table. If it rains, it drums on the metal house as if you were sitting in a tin can and being hosed down. But the worst is if it's cold outside. The cotton blanket is heavy and damp and you can't get warm under it. Ariana sleeps in a jacket and still wakes up at night because she's cold and can't feel her arms or legs. She learned early to turn on a boiling pot, to warm her tea in a half-liter jar. Some commission would have killed Lucy if they come here. She had a kid doing all the things kids aren't supposed to do. Grabs a can of boiling water with a towel, pours it into a cup, wakes up the drunk mom and puts her to bed. And if any of mom's friends want to talk, Ariana sits opposite, wrapped in rags, listens obediently and nods. And some overgrown bearded man in a bandana with skulls, sympathizing, will nod to her, stroke her head, and sometimes even take a chocolate bar out of his pocket. Ariana started school when they moved, the mother of someone's bastard daughter, because Ariana had never seen her grandparents, inherited the house. Lucy was gone for a few days, entrusting her daughter to friends who lived in similar trailers in the neighborhood. Ariana recalled sitting around the campfire with them until late at night. She was a remarkably obedient child. Later, she wondered why, not in Lucy's character. She was not only the one who could not put her finger in her mouth, she did not know any restraint at all. Probably her father, about whom Lucy had never said a word to her daughter, had been a quiet and shy young man. That shyness was the only thing he had left as a legacy to Ariana. Lucy returned the same as ever who had died in her family. She did not grieve. On the contrary, she was unaccustomedly excited and said that they were about to buy a room. The deal went through very quickly, and it wasn't 2 weeks before they moved in. For Ariana, it was a blow. She thought about it all later, when she was older. Probably her mother had been given very little money and only enough for such a place. The oldest stock, houses that no one would ever repair. It's easier to tear down. A room of 15 square meters in a communal house. A dark and gloomy courtyard, surrounded on all sides by similarly shabby houses. The hallway is shabby, like a horror movie. A long, narrow corridor, painted with blue paint that was already falling off in some places, and 8 doors. 6 rooms, a shared kitchen and restroom. A bathtub so horribly dirty that none of the tenants ever tried to do anything about it. Maybe the others went to the bathhouse. Ariana remembered her mom washing in her room in a basin. And then those who lived downstairs would come to swear they had a wet spot on the ceiling. It was cramped and cold in the trailer, but there was nature around. There were mom's friends. And here it's gloomy. The sun never peeks out on the north side. Not a blade of grass in the yard. At home, there are mean aunts all around. One of them was counting on buying the room Lucy took from her for a pittance. And that same aunt hated the new tenant and her daughter. Lucy could always talk her way out of it. She went into the common kitchen without fear. The other women felt that this one was capable of anything. She would shine a cooker in her forehead. Only a rumble would go up and tar in her presence. They only pressed their lips together, showing that she was a stranger to them and would never become their own. And Ariana was afraid to go out into the corridor and did not even heat up her food and ate cold what her mother left her. Like a mouse, she would sneak to the bathroom and back again, and then sit on the wide, crumbled windowsill, watching to see if Lucy was coming. What else is there to do? Ariana couldn't read at that time, and Lucy didn't have any books, and there was no television. Now it seems to Ariana that it was always raining outside the window, but of course it couldn't be like that. It was just the mood, as if it was always raining and slushy. When it was time to go to school, her mother took Ariana to the nearest school in the neighboring yard. At that time, Lucy was already working in the store Wine and Tinctures. It wasn't a store, but a kind of bar. Of course, there were those who came in for the takeaway wine Lucy poured from small kegs into plastic bottles. But there were always men hanging around the high tables, buying wine, or more often tinctures, talking among themselves for hours, and there was such a smell in the air that there was no need to ask anyone to breathe. It was clear that everyone was drunk. On a platter were lollipops, small ones in brightly colored wrappers. They were free for anyone who bought a drink as an appetizer. But the men were never tempted by that kind of snack, and Lucy brought them to Ariana every night. But the school uniform thing was stupid. From time to time, her friends gave her clothes that their own children had grown out of. Lucy didn't know anything about it at all. It was like a different planet to her. She herself wore jeans so ripped that sometimes when she put them on, her foot fell through the hole instead of into the pant leg. And t-shirts with defiant inscriptions, and it was a good thing that at work she had to wear a smock over it, because what was written across Lucy's chest sometimes made even men blush and blink. And so, before taking her daughter to school, Lucy took out of the bag some dark sundress, twirled it, spun it around, and decided that it was quite suitable for school. And the shoes over there were still in one piece, not falling apart. The only thing Lucy had bought her daughter was a very pretty bow. It was like a huge butterfly, and it had white ribbons that came down and curled like curls. Ariana spent the whole evening looking at it, even afraid to breathe on it. Lucy didn't even think about the bouquet for her teacher. September 1st was a disaster for Ariana. She was too different from the other children, who came dressed up, wearing everything new, crisp, and ironed. The schoolyard was drowning in flowers, cheerful music was playing, and Ariana stood red with embarrassment and shame, and her eyes were filled with despair. One of the girls next to her wrinkled her nose. "Yuck, you stink." Ariana couldn't smell it herself, but maybe she'd picked up the odor of the old house. Or maybe it was the smell of the bundle of clothes that one of her mother's friends had brought, and where Lucy had gotten the sundress from. Ariana couldn't remember if her mom had washed it or not. But it was worth saying such a thing to one girl, as all the future classmates began to diffidently shy away from Ariana. It was a game to them. The same thing continued after the class line. "I'm not sitting with her." "Me neither." "Betty, she's a stinker." "Oh my God," the young teacher was getting dizzy. "Okay, what's your name?" "Ariana." Let Ariana sit alone for a while. The teacher had a lot of things to do. She had to tell the kids what to bring to class tomorrow, answer questions from the parents at the door. And yet, when everyone was leaving, she stopped Ariana, who wanted to slip away unnoticed. "Wait, tell your mother to give you a bath today, wash your clothes, and let her dress you neatly tomorrow. And you better start looking after yourself. You don't want everyone laughing at you." To add to her misfortune, Ariana's main treasure, her bow, was stolen. When she got home, the girl sobbed until the evening. Talking to Lucy didn't get her anywhere. Her mother threatened to come to school and kick out all those who hurt her daughter. "They won't yell a second time," she assured her, "and they'll avoid you." Ariana imagined what her life would be like if everyone started to pass her even on the second or third road instead of the 10th. "Teach me to do laundry," she asked her mother quietly, "and ironing too." Soon the girl was fully able to take care of herself. Now she stood for a long time in front of a small mirror, looked at herself from all sides, whether all the buttons are fastened, not wrinkled skirt. It had become her mania to look neat, but whether the first impression was the strongest or the smell of the old house was ineradicable, Ariana could not find friends at school. All of them shunned her. She studied no better and no worse than others, did her homework as diligently as she looked after her clothes, and faithfully brought fours, occasionally interspersed with threes if the test was too difficult. And the teacher with a clear conscience stopped paying attention to her. The girl was quiet, inconspicuous, never got a D. Betty, of course, saw that Ariana had become an outcast in the eyes of the class. She tried several times to talk to the children about how important it is to live as friends, and that in a good team no one should be left out. But the heartfelt conversation had no effect on the boys, and the teacher gave up so it was easier. She calmed herself with the fact that she had no violence in her class. No one beats Ariana, and that she is not loved, so it is impossible to make her love. In addition, the girl behaves quite reasonably, does not pester classmates, does not seek their favor. It seems that she has come to terms with her loneliness. Probably will study until the 10th grade, and then will go to some technical school or college. Maybe they'll treat her differently there. And that Ariana was completely extinguished, never, and no one heard her laughter. No one knew anything about her life outside of school. Not once did she run races with other girls. It remained unnoticed by everyone. This happened when Ariana entered 6th grade. Later, she asked herself why she did it. The principal had made a new rule. The school cafeteria was no longer open. Now you could only buy a full lunch of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. There were some families where parents thought it was expensive and stopped giving their children money for food. They said to their children, "Have a good breakfast in the morning, and when you come back after school, you will have a home-cooked lunch waiting for you." They got a lot of nerve at school. They only take money. What happened in practice? By noon, those kids who stopped going to the canteen were already pining for a snack and asked their classmates, "Bring a couple slices of bread from the cafeteria." But the cook is swearing, and you'll sneak in. Ariana hadn't eaten with everyone since 1st grade. She didn't want to be attacked in the cafeteria. She convinced Lucy that the food at school was not good, and her mother began to put her something to eat, a sandwich with sausage and apple. And that day, Ariana just felt sorry for her classmate Sophia, a girl from a disadvantaged family with many children. Sophia, as usual, asked the boys to bring her some bread, and they all refused. When the class was empty, Ariana took sandwiches out of her bag. "I have 2. Do you want one?" Sophia took the treat, brought it to her mouth, then defiantly grimaced and ran to throw the sandwich in the trash. You, it stinks. Did you find it in the dumpster?" The sandwich smelled only of Krakow sausage, but Ariana imagined what would happen next. When the boys came back from the cafeteria and Sophia told everyone that Stinky wanted to poison her, she slipped the sandwich she had found in the dump. And the whole class will happily pick up the new tease, all the fun in the middle of a long day filled with boring lessons. And for Ariana, it was probably the last straw. She thought Sophia was kind of an outcast too, and always dressed poorly, and her scandalous mother almost every week comes to argue with the teacher and the guys. She always feels that her daughter someone is hurting. That's why Sophia is disliked in class, and they try not to get in touch with her. And now she's decided to become popular at Ariana's expense for taking over a bullying situation that's already starting to die down. "I have a headache," Ariana threw to the teacher, bumping into her at the door. She didn't give herself a chance to stop. Afraid, she burst into tears in front of everyone. It had not happened to her in a long time, but then she finally collapsed. Ariana ran out of the school, buttoning her coat as she went, thinking only that it was Friday, and she wouldn't see her nasty classmates until Monday. Lucy arrived late as usual. Her store closed at 11, and she was home by midnight, sometimes jokingly saying that every day was like New Year's Eve. Considering that more and more often she ended the day tipsy and cheerful, it was believable. She started with light artillery of apple and cherry cider, and sometimes even draught champagne, and ended with cognac rowan or bitter pepper. A real wine connoisseur would have clutched his head at this stuff, but Lucy at this moment in her life was drinking it fine, and so far her face showed no signs of excess. She still resembled a Frenchwoman, loose hair, light eyes under the wings of her eyebrows, thick bangs, a laughing mouth. Many customers came not only to have a drink, but also to chat with Lucy and treat her, of course. Usually, Ariana was asleep by the time her mother arrived. On the stove, Lucy was waiting for a simple dinner of boiled potatoes, fried cutlets, losh carrot, or macaroni and cheese. But there was always a lamp burning on the table. It was the only thing Lucy had taken from her parents' house, or maybe it had belonged to her grandmother. It was a snowy marble house with small windows on 3 sides of the world. Ariana was used to falling asleep looking at it. It seemed to her that she wasn't alone in the room, and whoever was now sitting there in the hut was also brooding, dreaming, and waiting for her to come in the door. "But I can't," thought Ariana. "I'm too big and he's too small, and we'll always be waiting for each other." Lucy's heart snapped when she saw that the room was dark and the nightlight was not on. She slammed her palm on the light switch, not doubting that there was trouble. God forbid, Ariana wasn't home missing. She was greatly relieved to see her daughter sitting in an old armchair by the window, albeit crying, but here and alive. The fatigue returned. "What's wrong?" she asked. Ariana was only sobbing a little thinly, audibly. Well, Lucy ruffled her hair. She didn't have the energy to pry into her daughter's soul to find out why she was in a bad mood. All she wanted to do was lie down and sleep, and the floor beneath her feet swayed slightly. And Ariana knew her mother wouldn't have a heart-to-heart with her. She never had, and she wouldn't now. "Can I get someone?" she asked. She was saying in her mind that she couldn't be alone anymore, that she had no friends, that she had no strength to bear the ridicule of the whole world against her. "You mean a puppy or a kitten?" Ariana nodded, continuing to stare out the dark window as the rain streamed in. Animals were so out of Lucy's range of interest that it took her a moment to concentrate, as if she'd been given a difficult math problem to solve. "I don't know," she said doubtfully. "The neighbors would probably chew us up, wouldn't they?" But the girl looked at her mother with such suffering eyes that Lucy noticed for the first time that only those huge eyes remained from Ariana. "Then the kitten," she said. "At least you don't have to go out with it. You'll be less likely to be seen by those nasty broads. And yes, cats don't bark or chew on shoes." Ariana hugged her, snuggled up to her, breathed in her mother's scent. She had no one but her mom, and Lucy's heart ached at how thin her daughter was. And she never asks for food, she forgets about it. Should I bring her some cat horse? They used to give children cat horse for anemia. The next day was Saturday. There was a chance. On weekends at the town market, they sold all sorts of animals. Aquarium fish, birds, cats, and dogs. Ariana didn't have a lot of money. She saved a little from the bills Lucy gave her to go to the nearest grocery store. But the girl knew that it wasn't uncommon to give away purebred animals for free. Into good hands. Lucy was still asleep when Ariana, after a quick coffee, slipped quietly out of the apartment. To keep her mother from worrying, she left a note, "Off to the market," and put it next to the electric kettle. Lucy had coffee first thing in the morning too, so she's bound to see it. Of course, the most tempting thing becomes the unattainable. Ariana walked for the 5th time past an auntie who had a white poodle sitting behind her back. The dog didn't know he was for sale. He was sure that the owner was his family. They were one and the same. They would hang out in this strange place and go home. The poodle poked out from under his jacket with a sharp nose, looking around with curiosity. The owner asked dearly, maybe this time the puppy would go home. There would be no one willing to take it for such a price. With cats, as it turned out, the situation was bad. They'd offered pedigree cats, and it was clear that Ariana didn't have enough money either for this Siams or for that Persian. However, one man, passing by, winked at Ariana. "Do you need a cat, little one? Come on, I'll catch you a bag of fleas in the nearest yard." Ariana shook her head and frighteningly retreated. Even though Lucy had a lot of fancy friends, she had firmly instilled in her daughter that you shouldn't go anywhere with strange men offering you a puppy or a kitten. And then she saw her, an old woman who sat a little farther away from everyone. She was dressed in such a way that she was attracting attention. Some old vest trimmed with silver fur, a green hat with green feathers. Ariana had never seen anyone wear a hat with a feather in her life, except in fairy tales, and the old woman was also wearing round glasses. She looked like an old intellectual who'd gone a little crazy, or not a little drunk at all. That was something Ariana was good at. In front of the old woman was a cage of rats. 4 white rats were living their own lives, paying little attention to people or anything else going on around them. "Come here," the old woman said. Ariana didn't even immediately realize it was for her. But a grandmother, even a crazy one, is still not a stranger's man. Ariana timidly approached. "Give me your hand," commanded the old woman. She took Ariana's hand and opened a window in the cage. "Give the rats your hand. Don't be afraid. They won't bite." The girl wanted to say that she didn't want a rat, and she was afraid of rodents. But Ariana was too timid and most of the time preferred not to object. When her palm was in the cage, the rats became interested and reached out to sniff. Ariana could hardly keep from shrieking and pulling her hand away from their tiny wet noses and sharp yellowish teeth. But then one of the rats jumped right into her palm. "Take it," said the old woman. "Give me some money. What have you got?" "What do you got? $5? All right, come on." The old lady began to rummage through her clothes, as if the pocket where she wanted to hide the coin was deep under at least 20 sweaters. "But I don't want a rat. I don't like rats," Ariana whispered. "And you don't," the old woman allowed, "but you need that rat." She emphasized the last word in her voice, and again Ariana did not dare to argue. "Is it a girl or a boy?" Ariana asked hopelessly. "Is it?" The old woman hesitated. "It's probably both." She was crazy, no way around it. "What's the name?" Ariana didn't add his or hers. "Wealth," the old lady said, "and now I'm left with 1 boy and 2 girls. That's right. His name is Talent, and their names are Power and Love. And at home I have luck and health and happiness." The old woman was already muttering to herself, falling back into thoughtfulness. Ariana had a purse with her, made of colorful braid, in which she planned to carry the kitten home. Now the rat was going there. All the way he was unusually quiet. Only on the bus, when Ariana held the purse in her lap, did she feel something soft and heavy in it, and moving. Ariana sighed, imagining what the guys would say if they found out Walker was friends with a rat. They'd call her a rat herself. The other thing is, she wouldn't tell anyone about her pet. And how else would her mom feel about him? "You," screamed Lucy. "Gross. Throw it away." "Mom." Ariana clutched the bag to her chest. If anything, dealing with the rat was easy. Throw it in the nearest dumpster and that was it. Either it would take root there, or the first cat that came along would eat it. But Ariana couldn't throw away the living thing. "Did you pay money for it?" Her mother looked at Ariana with compassion, as if she were a wretch. $5. The girl whispered. Lucy sighed as deeply as if she were trying to hold back sobs. "Okay," she said, standing up. "That thing's going to need a cage, isn't it?" "I guess," Ariana agreed with a guilty look. A cage would be an extra expense, she realized. "I think I saw an old bird cage in the basement. Sit down, I'll get it myself. I know you're afraid to go in there." The basement ran under the whole house, damp and dark. Every tenant had a pantry cage there. The basement smelled like musty pickles. Ariana was afraid to go there even with her mom and a flashlight. Lucy did see a dusty old cage down there. Maybe it belonged to someone, or maybe the owner had long since died or moved away. Lucy was ready to fight if someone decided to take the cage away from her, or at the very least pay for it. After all, a rat was the only thing her daughter had asked her for. "Here," said Lucy, bringing the cage into the room. "Wipe it down with the wet rag. It's all dusty. I really hope that thing gets out of it." "Yeah, and jump into your bed in the morning," said Ariana, and went to clean the rat's apartment. Ariana decided not to tell her mother the rat's name. Lucy could laugh quite mercilessly at times. At such times, the girl made a vow to herself that she would never tell her mother anything else, for the 100,000th time. And then, for the 100,000th time, she broke her vow. The rat escaped the very next day. In the evening, Ariana sat late at night near the cage, handing Rich the breadcrumbs, and he took them with his clawed paws and long pink fingers and chewed so appetizingly that Ariana almost forgave her new friend the fact that he was a rat. Perhaps, yes, she would be able to carry him in her arms. In time, when she got used to it. First thing in the morning, Ariana rushed to the cage. She saw that it was empty. Only in one place the bars were a little loose. Ariana gasped with grief. He had escaped. She never raised her voice, but now she shouted, "Who?" A sleepy Lucy raised herself up on the bed. "That thing? Thank you, Lord," and collapsed back on the pillows to sleep. "You were the one who wished her away." Ariana burst into tears for the second time in 2 days. "You wished her away. You brought that broken cage." Lucy silently placed one of the pillows on her head so her daughter's crying wouldn't disturb her sleep. Ariana rushed to search the apartment. She foresaw that if she did not find a rat in the room, she would have to go to the corridor, to the kitchen, to the neighbors. And after asking her if our rat had come to see you, she and her mom would be fine if they didn't get evicted. Ariana even peeked into the hut's nightlight. Suddenly, the rat liked the hut and decided to live there. But inside the marble hut was empty and cold, only a small light bulb. Not in the closet, not under the couch, not in the dresser. There was no wealth anywhere. Ariana laid down on the floor and looked under the old nightstand left by the previous owners. And there in the wall was a hole, a black hole with jagged edges, as if gnawed by someone's sharp teeth. "Mom, give me the phone." With a flashlight. "You're gonna let me sleep or not?" Lucy finally got angry. "God, 1 day a week. Leave me alone. Leave me alone." She tried to get comfortable in bed so that she could go back to sleep, but there was no way she was going to succeed. Ariana and her phone were already at the rat hole, and damn it, there seemed to be a pair of eyes gleaming down there, maybe teeth. "Ariana, if you find your rat, don't grab it with your bare hands." Lucy's resigned to the futility of trying to sleep. "It'll grab you. Put something on your hand. My scarf." Yeah, you'd think she'd be able to fit a hand wrapped in a thick knitted scarf into that little hole. It would be good if she could squeeze through. Forgetting her fear, Ariana ducked her hand into the hole. It was unexpectedly deep, and there, yes, there was the soft, warm body of a rat, and something else, some object with hard edges. But at the same moment, Ariana realized that she couldn't try to get it out now, because Mom would intervene, and then everything. Whatever was found would be Mom's first and foremost. But she wasn't the one being bullied at school. She wasn't the one who sobbed so hard that she couldn't breathe, and her breath sounded like a moan. She wasn't the one who went to the market at dawn and talked to the crazy old woman. The only thing Ariana had pulled out of the hole was a rat. There it was, or he, hid and sat there quietly. "Did you find it? Well, take it easy. I'll fix the cage, and then maybe we'll get him a glass aquarium." Lucy reluctantly slapped her bare feet on the floor. A new day was beginning. Ariana didn't really understand why she had put off exploring the stash until the next day. She wished she was home alone. Maybe then a miracle would happen. And if not, and in the rat hole will be some nonsense, for example, an old tin can, and even empty, well, then there will be no one to laugh at her with her hopes, like a small child. And all Sunday afternoon, Ariana looked anxiously at her mother to see if she would not start cleaning, if she would not wash the floors, pushing back the furniture. But Lucy cleaned solely on inspiration, and it hadn't come to her today. She grumbled once again about the dirty bathroom after she'd gone in, wanting to douse herself in chlorine. Lucy was having a day when she didn't like everything around her, and there were always those gossipy women in the shabby kitchen. And outside the window was such a dreary, hopeless landscape that she wanted to become Raskolnikov and grab an axe. In the end, Lucy closed the curtains and lay down again, but this time to watch a movie. Tropics, endless beaches, young and beautiful heroes, love that never happens in life. That was what was dear to Lucy's heart, and that took her from the gloomy and slushy autumn to the world she wanted to be in. To Ariana, however, everything seemed marvelous. She was doing her usual chores, boiling soup on the stove, washing dishes, doing her homework, and everything was going well. If she'd been home alone, she'd have been humming. Lucy had told her daughter 100 times that she had no voice or ear, but sometimes singing was not about musicianship, but about a state of mind. Rat was behaving quite normally and no longer tried to escape. He often got up on his hind legs, held onto the bars of the cage with his front ones, and watched what Ariana was doing. And the girl felt as if she had a conspirator in the family. The next day it was time to go to school. Ariana usually treated Monday like an Egyptian execution. Ahead was another whole week full of endless lessons, and most importantly, the bullying of classmates and general rejection. But now the girl lived with one thing. When she would come back and be home alone, what would happen then? She thought only about it, and seemed so aloof and immersed in her thoughts that it was as if she did not exist. And the classmates fell behind for the first time. Teasing the dummy was not interesting at all. The teacher tried to find out why Ariana had run away on Friday without waiting for the end of class. Safia stayed nearby and acted very defiant. She thought Ariana was going to complain about her, so she prepared to fight back, using any argument she could think of. It's not my fault that Stinky eats garbage, but don't offer it to me. But Ariana shrugged her shoulders at her teacher's questions. I don't remember why I left. I think I had a headache. So you should have gone to the school nurse. Well, I'll do that next time. But as soon as the last bell rang, Ariana was gone. She told herself she was just worried about the rat, how he was doing all day without her. She was afraid to admit to herself that she had put everything on the line. She was expecting to find something extraordinary in the rat hole. She couldn't bear to be disappointed. The rat greeted her with some strange sounds like a quiet squeaking. It was as if he was tired of waiting and was hurrying her. But now Ariana was in a hurry too, even though she knew Lucy wouldn't arrive before 12 o'clock in the morning. Ariana only threw off her jacket. Then with an effort she pushed the massive old nightstand away from the wall. She looked at the rat hanging from the bars of the cage and ran her hand deep into the hole, up to her elbow. A moment later, she had already pulled out the box. She sat down on the floor and examined it, noticing that her hands were trembling. The box was of tarnished metal with a pattern between the edges. The lock was clearly a nonsense fingernail to pick and flip open. But Ariana hesitated, though there was something inside. She turned the box over and saw the date 1865 engraved on the bottom. Clearly the box had been made then, but the house where she and her mom lived now wasn't that old, was it? Ariana wondered for the first time who had lived in this room before her. And why had he gotten the idea to brick up the box in the wall and not take it back afterward? Maybe something tragic had gotten in the way and he hadn't had time. Ariana took a deep breath, effortlessly managed the lock, and flipped the lid off. That's where her breath broke. The tale continued. Indeed, someone had decided to entrust eternity with jewelry. Rings and brooches of artistic work with large stones, a bracelet, as if made of sparkling lace. So fine was the metal ligature of the pattern, and so many sparkles of stones, a thread of pearls. But Ariana's attention was attracted by a simple oval pendant. In shape, it resembled the same box in miniature and just as easily opened. And inside was, yes, it was a portrait of an ancient miniature, a child. Ariana couldn't even tell who it was, a boy, a girl, black curls, a white shirt, and the look of big eyes at once helpless, trusting, and commanding. Ariana realized she would give everything to her mother, just not this. She scurried around the room, not immediately realizing where to hide the thing. She had her own stash, randomly appearing. Her mom had bought her a cheap writing utensil made of blue plastic. The top was glued on top, also plastic, only white. Ariana used to put her pens in a special hollow, and then somehow she discovered that as she pulled it, a small, almost flat drawer would slide out. You could hide all sorts of little things there, and Lucy would never find them. Ariana hid the pendant, then snatched the rat out of its cage and kissed its tiny, wet nose, forgetting about the long yellow teeth and the noticeable odor. Thank you. When Lucy got home, Ariana was awake. They were sitting by the table, and on it stood an open jewelry box. If eyes can burn with excitement, Ariana's did. Why didn't you lie down? Lucy was easily surprised and came to the table. What do you have? Oh, eat her. For a few moments, she looked like a feeble-minded person. Her eyes glazed over, her mouth half open. Ariana hurried to explain everything, but in a context acceptable to her mom. She didn't even mention the old lady or the rat. She said she was cleaning, mopping the floor, and then something gave way under her hand, creating a hole in the wall, and there, inside, was all this stuff. Lucy let out a shriek, and she screamed like that, maybe only in her youth, when she was running on her bike like an eagle. This immediately provoked a reaction in the communal apartment, and a couple of moments later, there was a banging on the door. "What's going on? Have you been murdered in there? Call the police. Evict them." Lucy responded with a long, florid phrase that had only two censored words, "old purses," and the rest was a recommendation of where the purses should go. After that, she telephoned one of her many friends. "Garka, drop everything and get over here." "What? You don't want to throw a pillow?" "Yeperni Babe, your theme? There are such tzatziki. Don't ask where from. It's 1001 nights." Lucy started swearing again, so much so that Ariana couldn't understand her anymore. The tenants of the communal apartment didn't manage to sleep that night. One shock after another awaited them. First, Garka appeared, a 40-something Ambo, who could only be seen by old ladies in a terrible dream. He was 2 meters tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black jacket studded with all sorts of metal gadgets. Bearded with a low, smoky voice. The old ladies immediately huddled together in the kitchen and called the police. While the guards were on their way, Garka had time to appreciate the treasure he had found. "A good life awaits you now, girls. Lucy, don't be afraid. We'll soon talk it over." He was gone before the police arrived, and he took the box with him in his pocket. Lucy had been terribly thoughtless to entrust what she thought was a real treasure to an old acquaintance. Ariana might have asked her mother to be more careful, but now she saw the treasure as something that had almost nothing to do with her, and her mother wouldn't have found the locket anyway. When the police arrived, the two young boys had to be satisfied with the old women's choked-up speeches about how this promiscuous woman with 5 fingers pointing ominously at a smirking Lucy was bringing in all sorts of criminal-type personalities in the middle of the night, unashamed of the child. Lucy was apparently euphoric. "Would you boys like a drink?" She'd offered her uninvited guests a drink. There was a paper on her after all. Ariana trembled as uniformed men arrived for the first time in her memory. She was afraid her mother would be taken away, but Lucy nonchalantly signed out, and with a sweet smile she saw the policemen off like best friends. "What's going to happen now?" Ariana asked in a trembling voice. "Oh, we'll probably pay the fine." Lucy yawned and finally got undressed for the night. "It's all bullshit. Go to sleep, kitten. Now we have a new life." Much later, Ariana realized that her mother had decided not to make the fine public, but to market it through her really semi-criminal friends. And 100,000 times over her left shoulder, she really wasn't fooled in the sense that she got even more than she had bargained for. Garrick must have gotten his hands pretty good too, but Lucy was satisfied. Ariana never found out exactly how much money her mother received, but Lucy immediately went with her daughter to the realtors to buy a new apartment. And she acted like a visiting star. In fact, that was all they had enough for. An apartment in a new house, which mother and daughter both considered chic house, stood in an elite neighborhood. On the roof was a garden, and in the entrance sat concierge. And Lucy bought herself a car, not a new one, as she said, but a luxury one. But there were other little things, like clothes for both of them. And Lucy's new job just sort of added to the abundance. The same Garrick, probably he had done a very good job, and in gratitude he had arranged for Lucy to live with an old, rather strange character, but a fashionable writer. Lucy became his housekeeper or something like that, and in time a real right-hand woman. It was hard to imagine her suited to the role. Not very well educated, far from an ideal hostess, she nevertheless came to court. The writer found Lucy amusing, and she did not annoy him at all. The two were a match. Lucy ordered the food that the writer liked. If it was necessary to do a general cleaning, called the guys from the cleaning company. Herself did not get dirty. But the writer somehow decided that he needed such a woman in the house, which did not take anything to heart, and felt his mood could be silent all day long or told different stories, which he had a lot of adventures. In everyday life, the writer was undemanding. Only a strong coffee is always at hand. And in the evenings, when Lucy went home, she always left for him filled thermos. "You'll make your heart race," she warned him. They almost immediately went on you, as if they were not master and servant and buddies. The writer only waved away. "You should live as if you were riding a motorcycle. Well, like you told me the other day. If you crash at that speed, you won't have to suffer for long. You'll go straight to heaven, you sure." Lucy was squinting. "Or to hell," corrected the writer, and what may be even more fun there, as one good poet wrote, Yusakov something, preparing for heaven? Bring a Jim Beam, Harley Davidson. Jim Beam, Harley Davidson Durex. But trust me, in every Eden, there's a serpent that secretly knocks, and someone who will one day point you out the door. Are you preparing to smoke in the fiery furnace for eternity? Prepare yourself, but remember, cherish your sorrow. Every hell has a back room, a coat, keys, nightly conversations, and sugar-sweetened black tea. Lucy nodded and quietly shut the door behind her. The writer's future did not concern her. But what about Ariana? Her mother had taken her out of her old school immediately. Not because she wanted to rid the girl of the classmates who had been bullying her for so many years. It's just that there was an equally elite school next to an elite house, and Ariana was accepted there. It's the closest. The school was in the courtyard. You could look out the window to see if the lights were on in your classroom in the morning or not. And it was impossible to imagine that any of the students would be harassed. There are 15 kids in the class, all roughly well-mannered, and the teacher looks like Mary Poppins cooing over everyone. But before that, Ariana could have an hour of triumph if she wanted it. Together with her mother, they went to the old school to pick up their papers. It had come out of nowhere that their little family had gotten rich. No one really knew how, but they walked down the school corridors, Lucy and Ariana, in cool clothes, as the same Sophia told later, choking on the excess of emotion. Do you know how much such a jacket cost? And the boots? It's awesome in general. Come to think of it, girls, Ariana now. You can't spit on her. Ariana heard that whisper that accompanied her and her mother, but walked on without looking up. She knew that she would never willingly stay at this school, even if they started carrying her here. And she didn't want to triumph over those who had wronged her. She just wanted to get her papers and forget about this place. That was all. In the new school, she was so calm, as if she was surrounded by children from another planet, where there were no such feelings as anger, envy, bullying. If she asked questions, she was welcomed. A few girls showed with all their behavior that they did not mind to be friends with her, and the teacher sincerely tried to make Ariana understand the new topic and cope with the test work. The past gradually began to be forgotten. Ariana was surprised to feel her heartache weakening and the joys of life coming to the forefront. She noted that she now behaves like an ordinary girl, asking her mother to go to the store with her for some clothes. From time to time, she stays overnight with one of her new friends and pastes her room with posters with images of one of the fashionable rock bands. When Ariana went to high school, the writer died, and since he had no loved ones, he left a will that transferred everything to Lucy, including royalties from his books. Ariana and her mother moved once again now to the country house of the deceased. Lucy decided to rent the apartment for the time being. When you finish school and become of age, it will be yours, Lucy promised her daughter. Ariana did not want to change school for another, and now Lucy drove her to the beginning of classes every morning in her new car. Soon after the writer died and Lucy inherited the house, the rat died. He turned out to be a long-lived rat, as it were. Lucy did not recognize the secret of the animal and did not understand why her daughter tried with all her might to save him. Buy a new one, that's all, she snorted when Ariana returned from the vet in tears. The rat had grown a large tumor, and surgery had only briefly prolonged his days. Shortly after the rat was gone, Lucy had thrown away the old desk and the antique pendant in a fit of cleaning, which was the kind of cleaning she did it on impulse. Ariana had not intended to tell her mother her secret, but now she was desperate to tell her what she had lost. Unfortunately, she didn't notice the loss until the next day, and the company responsible for cleaning the bins had already cleared the trash out early in the morning. A giddy Lucy waved her hand. We're not going to go through the entire city dump. It's a shame, but you know how it is. You can't put too much value on anything. And Ariana accepted it, though she never told her mother that it wasn't the jewelry that she really felt sorry for, but the portrait, no matter how much it cost. During this time, the man depicted in the miniature seemed to have become her own, and when her friends talked about boys, Ariana thought of him, though it was silly and childish. With the one who looked at her from the portrait with big black eyes, they hopelessly missed in time. That's all. Since then, there had been no money-related surprises in their family, but they lived more than prosperously. The writer's books continued to be published and the bank account gradually grew. If Lucy was accustomed to luxury, she would have successfully spent everything, but she still made do with a rather modest amount and decided to save the rest for her daughter. At the graduation party, Ariana got drunk for the first time in her life. The former classmates seemed to have shed their decent masks. The boys and girls were having fun in a way they could not afford before. Luckily, it didn't have bad consequences for Ariana. She just fell asleep at dawn and woke up in the evening with a cup of coffee after taking a headache pill. Her studies, when she stopped being interrupted, were excellent, and she got into the institute without any problems. Lucy didn't approve of her choice. She would never have gone to biology, but she didn't interfere. Better something creative. She sighed. Estrada, show business, literary institute. Ariana looked at her like she was a little girl. Mommy, but I don't have the ability. Well, yes, Lucy nodded, but some people without any abilities manage to get through. It's just that there's another life out there, as if it picks you up and carries you along. Vivid experiences, interesting people. What's in store for you? You will go to the same job in the mornings and come home in the evenings, and you will not notice how you will grow old. When there's routine around, life flies by very fast. 10 years is like a blink of an eye. Why one job? Ariana said thoughtfully, no, one job is better. I would like to find my own business and never leave it. In her 4th year of university, she got married. Ariana didn't want to go anywhere during the summer. She had enough practice. She would have preferred to spend the last month of summer at home, to sleep well, to lie in the garden with a book and a can of Coke, to listen to music, to call at least on the phone all the people she had never had time to see. But Lucy bought her a trip to Turkey and pushed her out to vacation almost by force. It's like you're not even my daughter, she said. How can you be so boring? Books and girlfriends and nothing else? Apparently, some higher power heard Lucy, and on the plane, Ariana met Harry. He was a businessman, lived in the same city as her, and was going on vacation. At first, they stayed close to each other, as they had no other acquaintances here, that they became friends, and then they began to spend all their time together. They decided to get married before New Year's Eve. Harry said it was the most romantic time, and indeed everything was beautiful. And Ariana's outfit, except for the white lace dress, was a cape for warmth, because it was to be photographed in the open air. The cape was trimmed with white fur, and in this outfit Ariana looked like a snow maiden. A country restaurant in an old manor house and a wedding trip to Prague were also good. When they welcomed the new year in the square, and mulled wine was smoking in their glasses. Lucy was alone, but she wasn't sad at all. It even seemed to Ariana that her mother was relieved. Now she felt that her duty as a parent was finally done, and she returned to the life she had lived before. Old friends began to visit, and when Ariana visited her mother, she often found a loud party going on. Ariana received her diploma, but there was a hiccup for a while. A young woman going to work in a school was out of the question. I will lose you, her husband told her seriously. Teacher is a round-the-clock profession, and I want you to belong to me and our children at least a little bit. Ariana thought of a nature reserve, but it would be a long drive. The staff would move to a small village, build houses there or get dorm rooms. Of course, Harry couldn't do that. He couldn't give up his business. So they settled on the university. Ariana found a place in one of the departments. We'll see what happens from here, Harry said. In his heart, he wanted his wife to go on maternity leave. He himself was his parents' only son, growing up bored with his peers and wishing his own family had many children. But Ariana's pregnancy was not coming. Not immediately, but she listened to her husband's entreaties, and they both went to the doctor. Some problems were detected, treatment was given, but nothing helped. Sometimes Ariana thought sadly of the old woman with the rats. That one, of course, was no longer alive. Otherwise, she could have gone to her and asked for an animal named Plenty. Then Ariana would probably give birth to 7 at once. A bitter joke, but nothing else occurred to the young woman. Harry talked about going abroad and the doctors there. And then, as if he waved his hand and listened to the advice of a young acquaintance. Take a child in an orphanage, she said. It has happened many times. People have already given up. Take someone else's baby, and God will give his own. The main thing then is not to give up the adopted child. Harry tried to speak in a light tone, but it was obvious that the thought has fallen into his soul. From the point of view of all the supervisory bodies, they were ideal candidates. A young, well-to-do couple who lacked only a baby to make them happy. They had disagreed about the baby, though. Harry insisted on taking a very young girl, no older than a year, so that the child would have no memories of the past, and the baby would think of them as her real parents. But that's not fair, Ariana objected. We'd have to tell the foster child the truth anyway. But why? Objected Harry. It would be traumatic. Because different things happen in life, and a son or daughter has the right to go back to their roots when they grow up. To some back alley drunk, or to a stumbling mother who's cursed her mistakes 100 times over. Some Frida who, day after day, year after year, fate puts the same handkerchief on her bedside table. Harry just waved his hand, not wanting to argue further. But at the orphanage they had indeed been advised to see not babies first, but children from at least the younger group, assuring that this is not a cat in the bag, and here will be seen in character and inclinations. At the same time, the children are still young enough to form an inner core, and they will get used to the new environment quickly. Behind them was the gathering of documents and all sorts of examinations and the school of foster parents. They were standing in the playroom, very bright and cozy, and there were 20 kids crowded around the books. Some of them were in shirts and dresses, in half-unbuttoned pantyhose. Some had their fingers in their mouths. Some were tired of looking at strange uncles and aunts and had returned to the game. Harry looked around confused, and the teacher tried to turn his gaze from one child to another, saying something nice about each one. Cindy, she's already taken care of herself, and she can make the crib, and she always helps me put toys in the drawer. Archie likes books. He spends hours looking at pictures. He'll probably be the first to start reading. Naomi is a real artist. She participates in all our concerts and recites poems. She's a very artistic girl. From time to time, Harry glanced at his wife, as if asking her advice, but Ariana remained silent. Then another boy came out of the bedroom, and she forgot all about it. It was a copy of the child whose portrait in the locket she had kept for so long. He looked at her, and Ariana almost shrieked. The same black eyes. The kindergarten teacher noticed the boy too. That's Billy, she said with a sigh. He doesn't talk yet, but he's getting there. We're just a little behind the others, aren't we, Billy? Forgetting her husband, Ariana walked over to the boy, squatted down in front of him, and asked, "Shall we go home?" He looked her straight in the eyes and seemed to understand more than he could put into words, even if he spoke. The director of the orphanage tried to talk them out of it, to make them choose another child. "Why do you want Billy?" she asked the couple. "You can't say you fell in love with him at first sight, can you? It doesn't work that way. He's got a lot of health problems. We don't know how much speech he'll regain, and there are doubts about the boy's mental capacity." Harry waved his hands, as if to say that he understood everything, but could do nothing. His wife's will. And Ariana asked, as if not hearing the headmaster, "Is he an orphan?" "Absolutely," sighed the director. "He was raised by a young mother. Who was the father?" She herself, I think, was not exactly sure. And then she left and disappeared. "So why are you sure he's an orphan?" Harry intervened. "The mother might show up and be reinstated as a parent. That's why I'm sure." The headmistress smoothed the folder on the table with her palm. "That the mother's body was found in the river a week later. She drowned herself, or the police say she drowned herself. No signs of violence." "That's awful," Harry breathed out. He'd grown up in a well-to-do family, and he'd never been exposed to such horrors. She wasn't a drug addict, was she? No, she was a young girl, not a dope fiend. But how could she? Who did she leave her son with? I guess she got to a point where she didn't care. Billy was still talking. Mom said goodbye to him, told him not to be sad for her, and left. When they brought him to us, he kept waiting for his mom to come for him. And then one of the teachers here said that his mom died, and that's when he stopped talking. Now we don't know what to do with him. If he talks, we'll keep him. If not, we'll have to send him to a special boarding school." "No," Ariana said, as if it were a done deal. "We're taking him. But you can't just do it right now. It doesn't work that way. We have to do the paperwork. That's gonna take time. So let's get started." Ariana's voice was impatient. "Let's get this whole thing over with. I'm sure he won't start talking here. We have good conditions. The director even took offense. You should see what happens in other orphanages. Ariana just waved her hand. After some heated discussion, the time frame for when they could take Billy came up. Ariana, but why this particular boy? Harry asked cautiously as they drove home. Because you can't choose your children, she answered briefly. It's my child, that's all. And Harry was silent, explaining what had happened only by the fact that women must feel something. They are carrying a child, so maybe his wife had sensed something, a sign from above. Billy didn't speak for a long time. Ariana was preparing for his arrival, as Harry used to joke, to burst. She had literally licked the whole house. The children's room was filled with toys and balloons. Do you think the boy lived in such conditions? Harry asked expressively, emphasizing the word such. Do you think Billy wouldn't be happy about it? Ariana answered questioningly. Harry only shrugged his shoulders, and Ariana was moved to tears as she led the little boy into his room, and he froze on the threshold, hesitant to cross it. He looked at the bouquets of balloons and the crib with the canopy and the toys as if he were in a fairy tale. He dared to enter, only holding Ariana's hand tightly. It's all yours, she told him. Look around, get used to it, and then we'll have dinner. The table was set too, and there was cake and fruit. But as Billy finished his milk from the cup, Ariana had a strange feeling. It was as if only now she realized that this was her home, and the most necessary and dear to her person was near. In the days that followed, various little things made her heart clench more than once. Now Ariana always took the boy whenever she went anywhere, whether it was to the grocery store or to the park. When she got to the supermarket, she asked Billy, "What do you want to eat?" He walked uncertainly along the shelves. Ariana expected Billy to choose sweets or to forget about food altogether and reach for the toys in the mesh basket. But he saw the bags of soup, the kind you have to dilute in a cup of boiling water, and he was as happy to see them as if they were old acquaintances. He held out the handle and then looked back at Ariana to say, "May I?" She just nodded. He took one bag and carried it to the cash register. Ariana realized that this was a puzzle piece of his old life, and she didn't want to tear it up. Since other moms bought their kids chocolates, this was how she threw a bag of quick soup in the basket. Billy ate NEP, chicken, mushroom, cheese soup. Slowly, he scooped up the thick pearlescent soup with a spoon, fished out the breadcrumbs as a treat. It was unhealthy and unhealthy, but the hell with it. He followed Ariana like a shadow, not annoying, not boring, not demanding attention. All he needed was for her to be near him. It was as if he had no energy left in him as a child who ran around, made noise, and could not be quiet, so that he was jokingly called an energizer. If Ariana was reading or sewing, Billy would sit beside her, rest his head on the couch cushion, and stare at her unceasingly. His eyes were big and his eyelashes were as long as a girl's. Ariana became worried and took her foster son to the doctor. The therapist, who had to see each child for no more than 10 minutes, found that the boy was weakened, what kind of nutrition he had. She advised to feed him better, prescribed vitamins. And in the summer we will go to the sea, Ariana promised her son when they left the clinic. You don't know what it is, do you? She often felt a feeling that could be called both excitement and trepidation, now that she was about to open to this little man a world he had no idea about. And the sea and seagulls and cotton candy and rice and favorite book characters all he would receive from her hands. He was making her an all-powerful wizard. The boy would only go to Harry if the man beckoned him. He approached obediently, stood close, listened to what he was told, but as soon as Harry was silent, Billy hurried to his named mother again. Ariana tried to make friends with her husband and son. She asked Harry to read to the child, sent them both for walks. But Harry did it all awkwardly, as if he was embarrassed in his heart, and handled the baby with strength. Billy, too, felt constrained, and they parted with relief. Next to Ariana, Billy spoke quietly, but he was not delayed at all. His first word was more as Ariana read him a book, and it ended. Her throat caught, but she pretended it was no big deal and just reached for a new book of fairy tales. Billy never talked idly. He didn't babble like the other kids who were hard to shut up. He could take Ariana's hand and lead her along. Let's go. When he wanted to show her something interesting, or ask for something he needed, give me a drink. That summer they did go to the sea, And there Ariana felt for the first time that her husband was jealous of Billy. He was unhappy that they didn't spend enough time together. Put the baby to bed and let's go out together for a walk. He's just a baby. He'll wake up. He'll see that there's no one there. He'll get scared. Ariana objected quietly. Come on, baby, sleep soundly. Leave the nightlight on and let's go for a walk along the promenade. But Ariana shook her head. Go on your own. Come on, please. I'd love it if you had fun. You can tell me all about it later. And on the beach, she was always with Billy, though she had been so fond of swimming far out to sea before. And now she was looking for seashells and building sandcastles with the child. And in excursions, they were now limited to those where the baby could be with them. You've ruined both our vacations, Harry said in his heart a few days before leaving. And I'm sorry. I don't understand your crazy attachment. It's still someone else's baby. It's not a stranger to me anymore. Ariana rarely dared to object to her husband outright. And I don't think you treat your own child the same way. No, Harry was touched. I think it's subconscious. I think he feels like he's the most precious thing we have. And with Billy, we agreed it was a trial run, a rehearsal in front of our own kid. Sort of like we relax, get comfortable with the baby we already had, and then we could have our own. Ariana, looking at her husband with wide open eyes, said almost fearfully, I never thought that you would treat a small child as a trial balloon, as an experiment of some kind. Well, I can see that you've grown to care more about this baby than you do about me and all your family combined. Harry waved his hand and turned the conversation to another topic, but Ariana could see that her husband was deeply hurt. That evening, as she was tucking Billy in, he suddenly said, Go out with him. Go out with Harry. There was a certain strangeness about it. He didn't call them Daddy and Mommy. He called them by their first names. Harry had said more than once that it was out of order, needed to be retrained. But Ariana objected. Perhaps he still remembers his birth mother well and realizes we're strangers. How am I going to leave? Ariana leaned over to the crib. What about you? I will sleep, said the boy and closed his eyes. That evening, Ariana and her husband took a short walk along the waterfront. The young woman was in a hurry to get to the hotel anyway, and Billy had insisted that on the last night Ariana and Harry go to a restaurant. It was supposed to be a romantic evening. Candles on the table, a girl with a violin, vintage wines. They danced and Harry embraced Ariana as tenderly as in the first days of their acquaintance. And then she felt uneasy, so they left early for the inn. The full moon was burning in the sky. It was a stunning evening, but Ariana's eyes were blurry. She had poisoned herself. She spent the rest of the night in her room, huddled over a basin. Harry offered to call a doctor, but she refused. It's a common thing in the South. I'd better get some rest, because I've got to train tomorrow. Billy nursed her until dawn, fetched water, and just held her hand when she thought she was dying. I shouldn't have gone, she said. If I'd sat by you and told you stories, nothing would have happened. I'm such a sissy. I spoiled your last night by the sea. He looked into her face with anxious eyes. It's nothing, just to make you feel better. Feeling something, Ariana lifted her head. Harry was standing in the doorway looking at them. How idyllic you two are. Well, I won't disturb you, and he closed the door. Ariana cried silently. Don't mind her, Billy said quietly, and try to sleep. I'll sit with you. When they got home, life seemed to go on as usual. Only Harry was emphatically not talking about Billy, as if he was taking less and less notice of him. Ariana tried to smooth things over. She was hurt to lose her husband's goodwill, and she was terribly afraid that Harry would want to take the cause of their quarrel back to the orphanage. She tried harder than ever to do her homework, asked her husband about his affairs, and was constantly attentive to him. But she could not help admitting to herself that her heart was already given to the boy. When Billy went to school in the first school fall, he became seriously ill. Playing with the boys, they pulled each other out of a puddle, and the water was November, icy cold, and they didn't go home right away. Ariana only gasped when her son came in with a wet coat. Neither a hot bath nor fiery hot tea with honey helped. The district doctor listened to the boy and gave him 24 hours if he didn't get better by tomorrow, to the hospital without talking. But that very evening, Billy got much worse. He began to choke, and Ariana called an ambulance. At the hospital where they were taken, it was still the old-fashioned way. Billy was considered big and had to be laid up by his mother. Ariana was literally on her knees, begging to be left with her son. A paid room, anything, at least for a while until he got better. I'm not getting away from him. Eventually, the exhausted elderly doctor took pity on them and put them both in the box, a small glass cage where mothers with infants were usually kept in the first days after admission to the hospital. But Billy was indeed heavy. They put him on IVs one after another, gave him oxygen, and apparently, to take his mind off his suffering, he asked, "Tell me a story." And Ariana had not thought of putting a book in her bag when she was going to the hospital. And then, in a hurry to fulfill the boy's request, she told him about the magic rats. He was the first to hear the story from beginning to end. Of course, he was interested in the treasure that had lurked for years in the secret place. "You never found out who lived there? Who hid it all?" "No, darling," she shook her head. "I had a feeling from the beginning that it wasn't mine. I should give it to my mother, and then it was up to her. And later on, I didn't take any interest. I kept that pendant." "Did the boy you drew really look like me?" "Like two peas in a pod," she said firmly. He hugged her very, very tightly and whispered, "I love you." From then on, sometimes when he was discharged, in the hours when they were alone, he would ask her to tell him the story of the rats. "Don't you get bored?" "No." "Doesn't anyone really know about it? Just the two of us?" "Just us." "What kind of rat would you take now?" "You see, nobody asked me. The one that came to me was the one I took. It was fate. And you, son?" He had his arms around her neck. "I have everything. I have you. Love, happiness, and wealth." Billy grew up and the couple never had children of their own. Having given up hope of being a real father, as he said, Harry urged his wife to go back to work. "You're going to fall off the grid. You can't just live your life doing housework. It's kind of shallow, isn't it? What will you remember in your old age? How you made borscht? You don't want me to sit on your neck?" He responded with a question. "What's that got to do with it?" Ariana thought that she finally forgot everything that she had learned at school and at the university. But of course, if she had to, everything would come back to mind. That wasn't what was important. The job would take up a huge part of her time, energy, interests. It would have to take it all away from home, from Billy. And something was happening to her, as if she was always afraid that something might happen to him, that fate would take him away from her. She was afraid for him, not for her husband, though Harry was spending less and less time at home. They no longer quarreled with Ariana. She tried to please him and avoided asking questions, and he was condescending and aloof. In high school, Billy became Ariana's second self. They understood each other half-heartedly, and she had never had a more reliable friend and helper. Unbeknownst to her, he had learned to do all the men's work at the labor class. He went to help Lucy, who in her old age began to see badly. He took care of her garden. He loved all this beauty. In the spring, he could bring boxes of half-dead plants from the grocery store. Most gardeners had given up taking them there. They wouldn't take root anyway. But Billy was nursing these barely alive twigs. He had some kind of life-giving hand, and the roses bloomed longer than the others, and there were no berries to pick. "I was kind of a biologist," Ariana told him with a chuckle. "Why don't you go to some horticultural school? You're clearly inclined." "I don't want to go far away to study," he answered. And Ariana realized he didn't want to leave her. Maybe there was a girl already? Billy was handsome. It wasn't uncommon for girls to look at him. But Ariana hadn't noticed that her son was attracted to anyone. It was always hard on them when they were separated from each other. Well, Ariana always knew she was a little crazy when it came to Billy. She wants her son in front of her all the time, but you can't do that. You have to fight it. And Billy, when he was sent to summer camp one day, came home on the fourth day. He climbed out of the window in the evening after lights out and walked down the highway all night. Poor guy. "What have you done?" She gasped when her son appeared on the doorstep. "I don't want to stay there," he said pleadingly. "There you have to do everything together, be in front of your eyes all the time. You have to go in formation, sit together in the canteen, sleep in a common room. And the most important thing is that you're not there." Ariana looked at him with a sad smile. "Well, you have to become independent. I won't always be around. You're growing up. Independent, but not a cog in the machine. and I want to be with you as long as I can. If you ask me to, I come and get you. You and me, we're gonna have to listen to a lot of recriminations. I'll tell you I made it up and you didn't know. Just up and left. First of all, that's the truth. Second of all, I'm not gonna let you get scolded because of me. Billy was always trying to keep her out of trouble. But the further time passed, the older the boy grew, the more and more tormenting feeling grew in Ariana's soul. Although outwardly their family looked quite prosperous wealth, lack of quarrels, on weekends they were often seen in threes. They spent time together, sometimes in nature, sometimes going to the theater or to the premiere of a movie. At all this, Ariana realized that there was Harry and there was herself with Billy. Two families in essence. She didn't need anyone but him. And she in turn was the center of his interests, the core of his soul. It was like Ariana was hanging onto the edge of a cliff, and the abyss beneath was called madness. There was no way this was going to continue. At the same time, she knew she couldn't open up to anyone, not a psychiatrist or a priest in confession. Maybe only Lucy, who herself had made madness and mistakes at every turn, and therefore judged no one. It was all decided by chance. When Billy was in his senior year of high school, he was tutored by a girl with whom all the teachers had been tormented for many school years. She had always been at odds with her classmates, had made a drama out of any trifle. And now, because the teacher, in Natalie's opinion, had given her an unfair grade, the girl had decided to jump out of the window. From the third floor, it was almost 100% staged. Natalie just wanted to open the frame, stand on the windowsill in front of the whole school, promise to step down now, and that the teacher would apologize and never lower her grades again. That Natalie would graciously agree to stay alive. But Billy didn't understand such nuances. He came back from the cafeteria before the others, saw Natasha in the open window, jumped in 2 jumps, and yanked his classmate to the floor. He didn't remember what he had grabbed her for. It turned out to be by her hair. Natasha hit the back of her head painfully and replayed the play on the fly. She threw a tantrum, saying that Stone had attacked her, beaten her, threw her, and there was a lump swelling on the back of her head. After half an hour, Natalie's mother joined in, saying she would file a police report, Billy would be put on the register, and so on and so forth, without end. The teachers, who hadn't seen the case, tried to find some kind of compromise. They couldn't blame Billy, who had never been seen doing anything like that. And at the same time, they realized that the girl's mother could get the school in trouble. Ariana was not feeling well that day. She had been thinking since morning that she should probably go to the doctor and have him prescribe her some pills for depression. And then she was called to school. They drove home with Billy. The young man seemed immersed in himself, and Ariana didn't ask him any questions. She understood that it was necessary to talk, to explain that it happens in life. The best intentions can be misunderstood, but it does not mean that in the future people in trouble should be abandoned to their fate. But Ariana didn't have the energy to have this conversation right now. It was only when Billy was going to bed that he called out to her. "Do you believe me?" he asked Ariana. He didn't specify what she should believe him about, but she understood and nodded. "I love you," he said before closing his eyes. She still sat by his bedside until he fell asleep like Billy was a baby. When she realized he was finally asleep, she bent over him, lightly touched her lips to his hair, and said in a slightly audible voice, "I love you too. It's just that we missed each other in time." Harry was already asleep too, and no one saw Ariana close the apartment door behind her. She was never found. The next week passed in a turmoil of searching, talking to the police, to the investigator. There was no sign of her and no leads. The woman walked out of the house and melted away for sure. Harry couldn't believe what had happened. He assured him that Ariana would be found. Maybe she had a friend they didn't know about, and she was now holed up at her place. Maybe she just decided to run away for a while, bought a ticket or hitched a ride, but she'll be back because she has no one else but them. Lucy had lost all sight by then, only light and darkness. When the police asked her about her daughter, Lucy shook her head. "She's not coming back." "How do you know? Has she contacted you?" The policeman stared at her. Lucy's sightless eyes reflected infinite sadness. She would never leave the boy. If she chose to leave, it would be for good. But was she alive? Lucy did not answer. Billy was the hardest hit by Ariana's disappearance. That school story had resolved itself. The teacher spoke to Natasha and her mother in a different tone of voice. The boy was grieving, his mother was missing, and no one would finish him off with a showdown at this time. But Billy did not care about all these twists and turns. The whole world had collapsed for him. His own mother had left him like that when he was very young, and now Ariana had disappeared without a trace. Had he heard her say, "We just missed each other in time," or was it one of those dreams that for the rest of his life he was sure was the holy truth? What became of his mother, Billy eventually learned, but Ariana's fate remained unknown. It was then that Billy had his first fight with his adoptive father for the first time in forever. "Don't play the grief-stricken man," he said sharply. "I know you have another woman long ago, another family on the side." Harry was taken aback, but he didn't make any excuses. He only asked, How did you know?" Billy grinned bitterly. "The first time I saw you was by chance in town. You knew Ariana hardly ever left the house, and you didn't try too hard to hide your date, and then it wasn't hard to guess. All those clients who can only meet in the evening or on weekends. All those business calls when you went into the other room with the phone. Did she know too?" Harry meant his wife. "I don't think so. And if she did, it wasn't for me. I would never tell her anything that would upset her." "There," shouted Harry. "That was the whole point. All this time you were acting like two people in love, so there was no room for me. I couldn't interfere in your relationship. I was superfluous. 100 times I wanted to take you back to the orphanage, but I knew then Ariana would leave with you." Billy turned pale. "And then you didn't care, did you? You just got yourself a new woman, a woman who loves me, and I couldn't leave Ariana. I felt that she was going crazy, that any minute now, she might have to be put in the hospital. And it wasn't because of me, it was because of you, son." Harry's tone was full of venom. "Because you're so little and she's so old." Ariana couldn't accept that. Billy raised his hand as if he wanted to slap his foster father. They stood against each other. Then the young man sat up and hid his face in his palms. Harry realized he was crying. "I'm leaving," Billy said. "Thank you, Lord, but where to?" "You think Ariana wouldn't want you to finish school? You're about to start your exams." "I'll finish school. I'll stay with Lucy. She can't be alone right now. You'll bring your friend here, Anne. You have a son, don't you? So you've got something to compare your feelings for your own child to someone else's. Well, love and advice." Lucy took Billy in like he was meant to live here. "This was Ariana's home, and now it's your home too," she said. Billy's heart ached at those words. Even his mother had talked about Ariana in the past, but living with Lucy had been easy for him. She had retained her character even in her old age, taking little to heart and fearing nothing, not even death. In the house, she learned to move by feel, and very rarely crashed into something or dropped something. She brewed coffee in an automatic coffee maker, generously added cognac to the cup, listened to music, and sometimes quietly sang and danced. On weekends, she often had friends over, and if you didn't look in the room, but listened to the laughter, the shouts, the melodies, you'd think it was a young crowd. Harry, whom Billy had never once called father, did exactly as Billy had predicted. He brought in a young girl, Selena, who had long since been his real wife and had borne him a son, Slavic. He had found what he was looking for. Selena worked for his partner's company, sitting in the office. Her smile alone was worth $1 million. Harry himself did not understand why she had agreed to date him and then resigned herself to the role of mistress for years. "I want the real thing after all this surrogacy," she said. "You're the real thing. Thousands of men lie and say their wife is sick so they can't get a divorce. But I know you're not lying, and that you desperately want to leave a family that doesn't appreciate you, but you don't. Your Ariane is really sick, and your stepchild is just a boy and can't take care of her. But there will come a time when you will be free, and then you will be with me. Not because I'm young and beautiful, but because you love me. I can see that. If I'm 1 in 1,000, you're 1 in 1,000,000,000. Selena was what he thought of when he picked out presents for New Year's Eve, March 8th, birthdays. He was happy to do crazy things for her, to buy expensive and rare things, and at the same time, to get something for Ariane and Billy. And when Selena gave birth to Slavic, Harry felt for the first time that life made sense. Sometimes they would lie there and dream about how they would live, where they would go, what they would do. But there was no telling when it would all happen. Selena smiled as she lowered him from heaven to earth. Which is what? When you'll be free and how? But God won't punish us. It's not like we wish Ariana anything bad. We just want her to disappear somehow by herself, right? Maybe she'll fall in love too and go to someone else. He shook his head. She's already fallen in love, and it's incurable. Harry sobbed at the wake he had decided to hold for Ariana. She kept not being found, and he agonized, waiting for a denouement and wishing for some kind of closure. You can search for years, the police told him. So we're looking for a woman, a musician. She went out for a walk in the evening, told her mother she'd buy some bread. She hasn't been seen since. If you don't find her within the first few days of her disappearance, get ready for it to take a long time. But Harry couldn't wait any longer. He summoned acquaintances far and near, and in their presence he mourned Ariana as if she were dead. I am sure she will never be found, he said. No wonder it was coming to that. Her state of mind lately, tears, depression. She's been going crazy, said one of her friends, who had a thing for Harry. She's been out of work all her life, so she's gone crazy. Billy, of course, didn't attend the wake. The next day, Harry brought Selena and her son home. He closed the door behind him and twirled the young woman in his arms. Freedom. Freedom. Selena, we're free at last. Do you believe it? A few weeks later, they left for the sunny south, on the very trip they had long dreamed of. And Harry was right. His own son didn't bother him a bit. From time to time, every few months, Harry called Billy. He'd speak in a polite, neutral voice, asked if everything was all right. Did Billy need anything? Maybe some money. The young man answered all the questions. Thank you, I don't need anything. In those first, most difficult years, his grandmother was Billy's salvation. Sometimes they would sit together by the fireplace, and Billy would look at the familiar features that had so much in common with his foster mother. It was only with her, Lucy, that Billy once talked about Ariana. Do you think she's dead? He asked. Why haven't I ever seen you cry? Not even Harry. Why should I cry? Lucy grinned. How long do I have left? We'll see each other again soon, at least in the other world. So you think? He couldn't go on. Lucy put her hand on his chest, paused a few moments, listening, then said simply, I know. And how? There was a sternness in Lucy's voice, the way she had decided. They never brought up the subject again, but Billy went to the river for a long time, where they said his own mother's body had been found. He would stare at the water for hours and wait for some kind of insight, for an epiphany, but the mystery never came to him. He did well on his exams. He could have shown, but with Ariana gone, everything in his soul was extinguished. Average grades were enough. Instead of the army, he was doing alternative service. He couldn't leave Lucy behind, and blabbed that he was a pacifist. But there was no problem. The city hospital was in desperate need of orderlies. He helped carry the sick and did all the dirty, hard work that is so necessary and for which young people so often do not want to take, especially for practically nothing. But Lucy had enough money that they were not in need, and Billy knew himself to be undemanding to the material side of life. Lucy gave him complete freedom and never spoke of choosing a future path in life, nor of marriage. Dear boy, she said, you have your own head on your shoulders, and I'm too tired to take responsibility for other people's lives. She tried to serve herself to the last, and asked surprisingly little to buy a bottle of her favorite cognac or bring a CD of this or that musician. And shortly before she died, she asked to be taken to the sea. Do not think that the old hag has completely lost her mind, said Lucy, ruffling her hair with the same movement as in her youth. I just want to say goodbye to my favorite corner. He's worried. Are you not feeling well? She looked at him over her glasses, which had long since been practically useless. If you're asking about that light, I'm off to a low start, but we'll still make it to the sea. It was one of the strangest trips of Billy's life. Lucy held him tightly under her arm and behaved in a way that people didn't immediately realize she could hardly see. They settled in a hotel, simple, cheap, but right on the beach. So, sitting on the balcony, you could hear the sea making noise. This accommodation had one disadvantage: the embankment under the windows. In the evening, every cafe had its own music. It smelled of kebabs, fried corn, and some spices. They sold bottled wine. Swings were flying up into the sky. Lucy sat on the balcony with a cigarette until late at night, almost until dawn. A real extravaganza, she said. That's what I wanted. They returned, the summer ended, and in the fall Lucy fell ill, and 2 days later she was gone. The writer's house where she had lived most of her life, she bequeathed to some charitable foundation and left Billy the apartment she had once bought for herself and her daughter. Billy worked for the DEMS. At one time he thought about medical school. He'd already seen a lot. But at the same time he felt he couldn't live 24 hours a day for the sick like the few doctors he admired. He needed at least some time to be alone with himself, with his thoughts, with his soul. He worked shifts at the emergency ministry. No special romance. Most often called to open locked apartment doors, sometimes asked to remove a favorite cat or cat from a tree, to rescue a favorite animal from trouble. In the heyday of the overseas disease ambulance knocked down, and often had to help transport heavy patients to the hospital, sometimes working in cooperation with firefighters, divers. Maybe Billy had gone into this field because he hoped to learn something about Ariana, at least from someone else's memories. Maybe a broken thread would come to hand, lead to where she is now. In his spare time, Billy often wandered the streets. He was drawn to those parts of the city where the yards were like wells, and the houses were barely holding on from old age, and it was obvious that they were about to be torn down. Narrow streets, the smell of damp. He spoke to those houses to himself, of course, so that he wouldn't be considered crazy. Touching the rough walls with his palm, asking himself if they had heard anything about Ariana. Then the city decided to build a new subway line. So they said 6 dozen houses were to be demolished because they couldn't withstand the underground tracks. The usual squabbles began, cynical on one side and desperately fruitless on the other. People who had lived in these houses for a century resisted moving, especially since they had always been offered minimal money, just enough for a shabby place on the outskirts. Billy knew what would happen next. People would be evicted anyway. Their houses would be torn down. They'd build luxury buildings that wouldn't need a subway, and they'll sell them for 3 times the price. Some still resigned and left. Others said that they would not leave their homes until the end, even if they bulldozed them together with them. We were talking about stone buildings. Billy remembered that when they were going to demolish wooden houses and people showed such intransigence, the houses were simply burned down. God knows who did it, but they never found the end of it. The houses always caught fire at night, and there were cases when people did not have time to escape. Once they rescued a mother with her children, and some rare medicine for the youngest child was not pulled out of the fire. Another day, volunteers advertised a fundraiser on social media to buy the drug. And now Billy has been called to one such home. Their grandmother disappeared, does not come, and in the room crying child, explained over the phone a worried woman. We already wanted to break the door, but decided not to act themselves. Let the professionals do it, so that we won't be accused of anything bad. You did the right thing, the dispatcher replied. Billy, will you go? It wasn't a big job to pick a lock on an old door, and Billy didn't think he'd stay long. He'd never been down this street before. If Lucy were alive, she would have explained to him that this was the same house and the same communal apartment he and Ariana had once lived in. A woman in her 40s in a ragged robe met him in the entryway. Granny, she said, we have a crazy granny living here. Honestly, I'm willing to move just to get rid of this neighborhood. She breeds rats. Can you imagine? Other people poison them, but she breeds them. The whole house stinks of her rats, and they run away from her. Billy was on his way up the stairs. And so we warned her that we'll call the Sanitary and Epidemiological Service, or as it's called now, and all her tail contingent will be eliminated. So today, she collected the creatures in a bowl and went to the market. She says I'll give them to people. She will. Who's gonna get their hands on that stuff? You know, every time she leaves the house, I hope in my heart that she will not come back. Not an old woman, some kind of witch, and then she is gone. And then we hear in the room as if someone is crying. We start knocking, but there's only sobbing. That's when we called the emergency services. Billy responded to the dispatcher's words. You did the right thing. I think so too, the woman rejoiced. And maybe when you open the door, we'll call some service ed. Let them examine the room in your presence, take pictures, and impose some kind of fine on the grandmother for unsanitary condition. Then we'll see. This door, you say? This one. Billy noticed he was surrounded by several women. They were all nosy neighbors. Apparently, the old lady wouldn't let them into her room, and they didn't know what was going on behind the door. He took out his tools. It was quiet behind the door. It didn't take Billy more than a minute to open it. Perhaps the roommates had noticed the pauper furnishings and the rat-infested shawl on the back of the chair right away. Maybe. Billy saw only the girl standing in the back of the room. 2 short braids just below her shoulders, a paper dress. That's the way children used to dress long ago. She was clutching a large gray rat to her chest, which didn't seem to be trying to escape. The girl looked just like Ariana, just as he'd seen her in the pictures. The resemblance was so complete that he closed his eyes. Look at that, a baby. Where had she brought her from? Girl, this grandmother is your kin, isn't she? They chattered behind the neighbor's back. We've missed time again, Billy wanted to say and couldn't. Instead, he asked, "What's your rat's name?" "It's Leslie," said the girl. "That's right.